For 25 years, I measured time in sacrifices. While the world slept, I worked. While others dreamed, I calculated bills. I took on extra shifts, second jobs, and sleepless nights, telling myself it was temporary, that one day it would all be worth it. Every dream I had quietly stepped aside so hers could move forward. I never told her how tired I was. I learned how to braid hair with shaking hands. I sat alone at school meetings, pretending I didn't feel out of place among families with two parents. When she had a fever, I stayed awake counting her breaths, whispering promises to God I wasn't sure He was listening to. I became everything she needed. And slowly, nothing she noticed. As she grew older, the way she looked at me changed. Conversations became shorter. Smiles became formal. She stopped asking how my day was and started asking how much something cost. Money became our language. One evening, during a small argument about wedding expenses, she sighed and said it casually, without cruelty, without thought. "You're just the bank. Why are you making this difficult?" She didn't see the way my hands froze. She didn't hear the sound of something breaking inside me. I nodded, the way I always did, and transferred the money. The bank always pays. Wedding preparations consumed everything: jewelry, venue, guests, expectations. I paid for all of it. No complaints. No lectures. This was my final investment. On the morning of her wedding, I watched her from a distance. She looked beautiful, confident, ready for a new life that no longer required me. Before the ceremony began, I placed a simple envelope on the table meant for parents. Inside was a letter. No anger. No blame. Just the truth. I wrote about the nights I worked late, the dreams I let die quietly, the love I gave without conditions. And at the bottom, one final line: "The bank is now closed." Then I walked out. No one noticed. No one stopped me. That's the thing about shadows, you only realize they're gone when the light feels different. She found the envelope later that night. I wasn't there to see her hands shake. I wasn't there to hear her cry. I was already gone, carrying 25 years of love I never learned how to ask back for. Some lessons come with a price, and some balances can never be reopened. The absence of a mother and a father's double role. Her mother disappeared from our lives so early that the memories of her faded before questions could even form. There was no dramatic goodbye. No explanation that made sense, just an empty space that grew larger with time. And in that space, there was a child who still needed love, guidance, and a sense of safety. So I stepped in. Quietly. Completely. I learned how to do the things I never thought I would have to learn. I burned meals and ruined recipes before. I finally figured out how to cook food that felt warm instead of rushed. I learned how to listen to stories that made no sense, to fears she couldn't explain, to silence when words failed her. Nights were the hardest. When she was sick, I sat beside her bed, counting minutes instead of hours, afraid that closing my eyes meant failing her. I memorized doctor schedules, medicine names, and the exact way she liked her pillow adjusted. Sleep became optional. Worry became permanent. At school, I stood alone in hallways filled with parents who came in pairs. Teachers asked polite questions, and I gave practiced answers. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded when I didn't want to talk, and left before anyone could see the exhaustion written all over me. There were moments, quiet, dangerous moments, when loneliness pressed so hard that it stole my breath. But I never allowed myself to fall apart. She needed stability, not a broken man trying to survive his own grief. So I became her comfort and her discipline, her softness and her strength. I celebrated her achievements and absorbed her anger. I played both roles without applause, without acknowledgement, believing that love didn't need recognition to be real. I told myself that one day, When she was grown, she would understand what it meant for one person to carry an entire family on their back and never once complain. As she grew older, our world slowly shifted beneath us. It wasn't sudden. And it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, almost invisible. Like a shadow slipping away with the sun. The way she looked at me changed. Her questions became fewer, her smiles shorter. Where once she had shared every small victory or fear, now her words were calculated, practical. Focused only on what she needed in that moment. The warmth we had once shared thinned, replaced by distance I couldn't cross. I watched silently as she built her own world, friends, studies, dreams, a future that didn't have room for me the way it once had. I remained in the background, careful not to intrude. Careful not to ask for acknowledgement. Love, I realized, is sometimes quiet endurance. A slow patience that never asks for thanks. I was no longer the first person she came to with excitement or worry. I had become a resource, a dependable presence only when needed. She came to me with requests, with demands. With questions about money or logistics. Never with her fears or her small joys. And I gave, always gave, because that is what I had always done. Because she is my daughter, and my heart had no other choice. Sometimes, in the silence of the evenings, I would catch myself remembering how it used to be, her running into my arms after a small triumph. Her whispering secrets in the dark. Her laughter filling the house. I would feel a sharp emptiness in those moments. A reminder that love can change shape and distance can grow. Even when the bond is unbroken. I never complained, never showed the ache inside me. I told myself this was normal, that growing up meant drifting apart. Still, each pause, each moment she looked past me. Each subtle dismissal, cut quietly. Layering a slow grief I carried alone. My love never wavered, even as the relationship changed. But love, I learned, is not always noticed, and sometimes it is only understood in its absence. One evening, after another long day of wedding preparations, we sat in the quiet of the living room. She was tired, fidgeting with the plans. And I was tired too, but silently. Without complaint, as always. I thought we were sharing a moment, even if small. And then, without warning, she said it. You're just the bank. It wasn't said with anger, not really. Not even with malice. It was casual, careless. The kind of words a child sometimes says without understanding the weight they carry. But the sound of those words hit me harder than any storm I had weathered. My chest tightened. My hands, which had always built, fixed, held, and paid, suddenly felt empty. Something inside me fractured, quietly, irrevocably. I didn't respond. I only nodded, the way I always did, because words weren't necessary. I had been the bank for years, providing, protecting, sacrificing, but never once asking for recognition, for gratitude, for love. And now, in a single careless phrase, she had summed up everything I had done. Everything I had been, in just 3 words. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual. I watched her sleep, the innocence untouched by the words she had spoken. I wondered if she would ever understand what it meant to live for someone else's happiness. Every single day, without pause. Without complaint. I wondered if she would see that love is sometimes silent, unacknowledged, and invisible until it is missed. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had happened. I continued with wedding preparations. Transferring money, coordinating vendors. Organizing details. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be for her. The bank must always be open. Even as my heart quietly closed a little more. I knew then that this was the beginning of the end. Not the end of love, not of care, but the end of being seen. And sometimes, being seen is all a parent truly wants. One evening, after another long day of wedding preparations, we sat in the quiet of the living room. She was tired, fidgeting with the plans. And I was tired too, but silently. Without complaint, as always. I thought we were sharing a moment, even if small. And then, without warning, she said it. "You're just the bank." It wasn't said with anger, not really. Not even with malice. It was casual, careless. The kind of words a child sometimes says without understanding the weight they carry. But the sound of those words hit me harder than any storm I had weathered. My chest tightened. My hands, which had always built, fixed, held, and paid, suddenly felt empty. Something inside me fractured, quietly, irrevocably. I didn't respond. I only nodded, the way I always did, because words weren't necessary. I had been the bank for years, providing, protecting, sacrificing, but never once asking for recognition, for gratitude, for love. And now, in a single careless phrase, she had summed up everything I had done, everything I had been, in just 3 words. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual. I watched her sleep, the innocence untouched by the words she had spoken. I wondered if she would ever understand what it meant to live for someone else's happiness. Every single day, without pause, without complaint. I wondered if she would see that love is sometimes silent, unacknowledged, and invisible until it is missed. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had happened. I continued with wedding preparations, transferring money, coordinating vendors, organizing details. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be for her. The bank must always be open. Even as my heart quietly closed a little more. I knew then that this was the beginning of the end. Not the end of love, not of care, but the end of being seen. And sometimes, being seen is all a parent truly wants. The house was buzzing with activity. A storm of excitement and chaos that I had learned to navigate without complaint. Invitations were being checked. Flowers ordered, jewelry polished. Halls decorated. Every detail, every expense, every decision rested quietly on my shoulders. I moved through it all like a shadow, unnoticed but essential. Carrying the weight of 25 years of love and sacrifice in every step. I watched her laugh with friends, glowing with anticipation for a life that was about to begin. One that no longer needed me in the same way. I smiled silently, not wanting to spoil the moment with the heaviness I felt inside. Everything had to be perfect for her. Even if it broke me a little more with each passing hour. Money flowed endlessly, payments, deposits, gifts, logistics. I had counted it all before. Planned it all, saved for it all. And yet, somehow, it was never enough to satisfy the endless tide of expectations. And still, I gave. Every last coin, every sleepless night, every ounce of patience. This was my final investment, not just in her wedding, but in a lifetime of ensuring her happiness, even at the cost of my own. There were moments when I paused, staring at the receipts, the arrangements, the tiny details no one would ever remember. And in those moments, I realized the full measure of my life had been spent preparing for this day. Every sacrifice, every silent night, Every moment I hid my exhaustion, it had all led here. And yet, despite all I had done, there was a quiet ache. A recognition that no amount of money, no perfection in planning, could replace the love that went unnoticed. The presence that was invisible. I carried on anyway, because that was my role, my duty, my choice. The bank must always stay open, no matter how empty it felt inside. The morning arrived quiet, almost sacred, though the house hummed with activity. Bridesmaids whispered, makeup brushes swished. Photographers moved in careful circles. And the air smelled of flowers and anticipation. She moved through it all, radiant, excited. Ready to step into the life she had dreamed of for years. And I watched, my heart swelling with pride. My chest tight with a silent ache I could never fully express. I felt invisible in that crowd. Yet utterly responsible for everything that was happening. Every smile she gave, every detail that went smoothly. Every piece of jewelry and every arrangement, the weight of it all, rested on my shoulders. 25 years of sacrifice had led to this single day. And yet, in the midst of all the celebration, I knew that once the ceremony began, my place in her life would quietly shift. She would no longer need me in the same way. She would grow into her new life, her new home, her new family. And though I had prepared for this, saved for this, and longed for her happiness above all else, there was a sting I could not hide. A quiet grief that whispered in the spaces between laughter and music, my presence, which had been constant, would soon be taken for granted. I moved among the guests, smiling politely, offering help where needed, saying the right words at the right moments. No one noticed the heaviness behind my eyes, the subtle tremor in my hands as I adjusted a veil or checked a schedule. To them, I was just the father of the bride, performing his duties. To her, I had always been more, but perhaps she would never truly know how much. And in that realization, I made my decision. It was not sudden. It was not born of anger or resentment. It was a choice shaped by a lifetime of giving silently, of loving without reward, of carrying everything alone. Today, I would give her the ultimate gift, my presence one final time in this form. And then my absence. A quiet departure that would leave only memories and a lesson she might understand one day. When the weight of love and sacrifice became real, I adjusted my coat, straightened my posture, and took a slow, deep breath. Today, everything was hers. And after today, I would disappear, not in anger, not in drama, but in the only way left to me, silently. Leaving only the proof of a life spent giving everything I had. Before the ceremony began, I did something I had never done before. I placed a simple envelope on a small table, tucked carefully among flowers and wedding programs. No one saw me. No one noticed. It was quiet, almost invisible, like everything I had ever done for her. Inside that envelope was the truth I could never speak aloud. A letter, neatly folded, with words that had lived in my heart for decades but had never found a voice. I wrote about the nights I had worked until my hands ached, the dreams I had buried so hers could grow, the quiet sacrifices that had gone unnoticed. I wrote about the sleepless nights at her bedside, the money spent, the worry carried silently, the love given freely without ever asking for recognition. Along with the letter, I included the receipts. Small reminders of a lifetime spent providing, protecting, and planning every detail for her happiness. Each slip of paper told a story of a father who had given everything he had, and yet had never been seen, not really seen, as more than a source of money, or a silent presence. And at the bottom of the letter, I wrote the only line that could express everything I felt. The only line that could explain my choice without words spoken aloud. The bank is now closed. I left the envelope carefully, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. And then, I walked away. I did not say goodbye. I did not linger for recognition or thanks. I simply disappeared, leaving her world intact, perfect, and unaware of the final lesson I had given her, that love is sometimes silent, and absence can speak louder than words. I walked out of the hall before anyone noticed. My steps quiet, my presence fading like a shadow at dusk. No one stopped me. No one questioned my absence. The music, the laughter, the chatter, all of it continued around me as if I had never existed. And in that moment, I felt both empty and free, carrying the weight of 25 years in silence, knowing that my final act of love had been completed. There was no drama, no tears from me, no final embrace. That was never what I wanted. She would wake up in a world prepared for her happiness, unaware that the man who had shaped it was gone. I had given her everything. And now I gave her one more lesson: sometimes love must remain unseen to be understood. And sometimes, absence speaks louder than any word. I walked through streets I had known for decades, watching life carry on around me, indifferent and beautiful. Each step took me further from her wedding, further from the life I had built silently in the background. My heart ached, but it was a quiet ache, one I carried like a badge. Proof of a life spent giving without expecting, loving without conditions. And in the distance, I imagined her opening the envelope, reading the words I had left behind, finally understanding everything I had been, everything I had done, and everything I had sacrificed. Perhaps she would cry. Perhaps she would curse herself for the words she had spoken. Perhaps, one day, she would forgive me for disappearing. I vanished into the world I had always been a part of but never truly belonged to, leaving only memories, love, and a lesson that could never be repaid. And for the first time in 25 years, I was truly alone, quiet, unseen, and at peace with the choices I had made. Hours after the celebration had ended, she finally noticed the envelope. It sat quietly on the table, untouched, as if waiting patiently for the moment she was ready. Curiosity, tinged with fatigue and excitement, finally compelled her to open it. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter. At first, the words seemed ordinary, polite, even formal. But as she read on, the layers of her father's life revealed themselves: decades of silent sacrifices, sleepless nights, endless worry, and love that had never demanded recognition. Each line struck her like a gentle blow, awakening a truth she had never wanted to see: that the men she had called just the bank had been the foundation of her entire world. She found the receipts, neat and precise, documenting every expense, every act of care, every moment her father had spent ensuring her happiness. The weight of it all pressed on her chest. For the first time, she truly understood the magnitude of what she had taken for granted. Every casual complaint, every thoughtless word, every day she hadn't noticed him, all of it became painfully real. And then, at the bottom, she saw it, the line that cut deeper than anything else: the bank is now closed. The simplicity of the sentence carried the force of a lifetime. She realized, too late, that the men who had given everything had now stepped away, leaving nothing but memories, receipts, and words. She could feel the ache of her absence before she even understood it fully. And in that moment, the truth hit her like a wave she could not hold back: love, when unseen, can be taken for granted. And some lessons are learned only when it is too late. Tears blurred her vision, guilt and grief colliding in a storm she could not control. She understood him now, understood his silence, his patience, his sacrifices. And yet, understanding brought no comfort. It was only a reminder that what had been given freely, without question, could not always be reclaimed. The house was quiet now. The music had faded, the guests had gone. And the laughter that had once filled the halls was only a memory. She sat alone, holding the envelope, staring at the words that had finally revealed the truth she had never wanted to face. For 25 years, he had carried everything, her happiness, her safety, her future, on his own shoulders. And for 25 years, she had taken it all for granted. The words she had spoken, careless and thoughtless, echoed in her mind, their weight now unbearable. "You're just the bank." She could still hear them, still feel the sting. The realization came too late. She had finally seen him for who he truly was, not just a father, not just a provider, but a man who had given everything without ever asking for anything in return. And now he was gone. Not angry, not resentful. Just gone, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any words could. The grief she felt was sharp, consuming. A mixture of guilt and longing that could not be undone. She wanted to call him, to find him, to tell him she understood, that she loved him, that she was sorry, but it was already too late. The lessons of a lifetime, the sacrifices of decades, could not be reclaimed once they were gone. And in that quiet, empty house, she finally understood the truth of love and loss. That some people give their all without ever asking to be noticed. And some balances can only be realized when they are forever closed. She folded the letter carefully, tears staining the paper, and whispered a quiet apology into the air, knowing he could no longer hear it. The pain had come too late. And all that remained were memories, love, and the haunting knowledge that sometimes the greatest lessons are learned only after it is too late to make a difference.